It's a long purport. As soon as possible. Srimad Bhagavatam 2:235. 2:235. Bhagavan Sarvabhuteshu Lakshita Svatmana Hari Ishyed Buddhyadi Vidrashta Lakshane Anumapake Bhagavan Sarvabhuteshu Lakshita Svatmana Hari Ishyed Buddhyadi Vidrashta Lakshane Anumapake Bhagavan Sarvabhuteshu Lakshita Svatmana Hari Ishyed Buddhyadi Vidrashta Lakshane Anumapake Bhagavan Sarvabhuteshu Lakshita Svatmana Hari Ishyed Buddhyadi Vidrashta Lakshane Anumapake
Bhagavan Sarvabhuteshu Lakshita Svatmana Hari
Lakshita Svatmana Hari
Ishyed Buddhyadi Vidrashta
Ishyed Buddhyadi Vidrashta
Lakshane Anumapake
Lakshane Anumapake
Bhagavan Sarvabhuteshu
Lakshita
Svatmana Hari
Lakshita Svatmana Hari
Ishyed Buddhyadi
Ishyed Buddhyadi Vidrashta
Lakshane Anumapake
Lakshane Anumapake Bhagavan, personality of Godhead, Sarva, all, Bhuteshu, in the living entities, Lakshita, is visible, Sva-atmana, along with the self, the Lord, Drishya, by what is seen, Buddhi adibi, by intelligence, Drashta, one who sees, Lakshane, by different signs, Anumapakai, by hypothesis. Translation purport. The personality of Godhead, Lord Shri Krishna, is in every living being along with the individual soul, and this fact is perceived and hypothesized in our acts of seeing and taking help from the intelligence. Purport: the general argument of the common man is that since the Lord is not visible to our eyes, how can one either surrender unto him or render transcendental loving service unto him? To such a common man, here is a practical suggestion given by Srila Shukadeva Goswami as to how one can perceive the Supreme Lord by reason and perception. Actually, the Lord is not perceivable by our present materialized senses, but when one is convinced of the presence of the Lord by a practical service attitude, there is a revelation by the Lord's mercy, and such a pure devotee of the Lord can perceive the Lord's presence always and everywhere. He can perceive that intelligence is the form direction of the Paramatma plenary portion of the personality of Godhead. The presence of Paramatma in everyone's company is not very difficult to realize, even for the common man. The procedure is as follows. One can perceive one's self-identification and feel positively that he exists. He may not feel it very abruptly, but by using a little intelligence, he can feel that he is not the body. He can feel that the hand, the leg, the head, the hair, and the limbs are all his bodily parts and parcels. But as such, the hand, the leg, the head, etc., cannot be identified with his self. Therefore, just by using intelligence, he can distinguish and separate his self from other things that he sees. So the natural conclusion is that the living being, either man or beast, is the seer, and he sees besides himself all other things. So there is a difference between the seer and the seen. Now, by a little use of intelligence, we can also readily agree that the living being who sees the things beyond himself by ordinary vision has no power to see or to move independently. All our ordinary actions and perceptions depend on various forms of energy supplied to us by nature in various combinations. Our senses of perception and of action, that is to say, our 5 perceptive senses of 1 hearing, 2 touch, 3 sight, 4 taste, and 5 smell, as well as our 5 senses of action, 1 hands, 2 legs, 3 speech, 4 evacuation organs, and 5 reproductive organs, and also our 3 senses, namely 1 mind, 2 intelligence, and 3 ego, 13 senses in all, are supplied to us by various arrangements of gross or subtle forms of natural energy. And it is equally evident that our objects of perception are nothing but the products of the inexhaustible permutations and combinations of the forms taken by natural energy. As this conclusively proves that the ordinary living being has no independent power of perception or of motion, and as we undoubtedly feel our existence being conditioned by nature's energy, we conclude that he who sees is spirit, and that the senses as well as the objects of perception are material. The spiritual quality of the seer is manifest in our dissatisfaction with the limited state of materially conditioned existence. That is the difference between spirit and matter. There are some less intelligent arguments that matter develops the power of seeing and moving as a certain organic development. But such an argument cannot be accepted because there is no experimental evidence that matter has anywhere produced a living entity. Trust no future, however pleasant. Idle talks regarding future development of matter into spirit are actually foolish because no matter has ever developed the power of seeing or moving in any part of the world. Therefore, it is definite that matter and spirit are 2 different identities, and this conclusion is arrived at by the use of intelligence. Now we have come to the point that the things which are seen by a little use of intelligence cannot be animate unless we accept someone as the user of or director of the intelligence. Intelligence gives one direction like some higher authority, and the living being cannot see or move or anything out these things. When one fails to take advantage of intelligence, he becomes a deranged man. And so a living being is dependent on intelligence or the direction of a superior being. Such intelligence is all-pervading. Every living being has his intelligence, and this intelligence, being the direction of some higher authority, is just like a father giving direction to his son. The higher authority, who is present and residing within every individual living being, is the super self. At this point in our investigation, we may consider the following question. On the one hand, we realize that all our perceptions and activities are conditioned by arrangements of material nature. Yet we also ordinarily feel and say, I am perceiving, or I am doing. Therefore, we can say that our material senses of perception and action are moving because we are identifying the self with the material body, and that the superior principle of super self is guiding and supplying us according to our desire. By taking advantage of the guidance of super self in the form of intelligence, we can either continue to study and to put into our practice our conclusion that I am not this body, or we can choose to remain in the false material identification, fancying ourselves to be the possessors and doers. Our freedom consists in orienting our desire either toward the ignorant, material conception or the true, spiritual conception. We can easily attain the true, spiritual conception by recognizing the super self, Paramatma, to be our friend and guide, and by dovetailing our intelligence with the superior intelligence of Paramatma. The super self and the individual self are both spirit, and therefore the super self and the individual self are both qualitatively one and distinct from matter. But the super self and the individual self cannot be on an equal level, because the super self gives direction or supplies intelligence, and the individual self follows the direction, and thus actions are performed properly. The individual is completely dependent on the direction of the super self, because in every step, the individual self follows the direction of the super self in the matter of seeing, hearing, thinking, feeling, willing, etc. Last paragraph. So as far as common sense is concerned, we come to the conclusion that there are three identities, namely matter, spirit, and superspirit. Now, if we go to the Bhagavad Gita, or the Vedic intelligence, we can further understand that all three identities, namely matter, individual spirit, and the super spirit, are all dependent on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The super self is a partial representation or plenary portion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Bhagavad Gita affirms that the Supreme Personality of Godhead dominates all over the material world by his partial representation only. God is great, and he cannot be simply an order supplier of the individual selves. Therefore, the super self cannot be a full representation of the Supreme Self, Purushottama, the Absolute Personality of Godhead. Realization of the super self by the individual self is the beginning of self-realization, and by the progress of such self-realization, one is able to realize the Supreme Personality of Godhead by intelligence, by the help of authorized scriptures, and principally by the grace of the Lord. The Bhagavad Gita is the preliminary conception of the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, and Srimad Bhagavatam is the further explanation of the science of Godhead. So if we stick to our determination and pray for the mercy of the director of intelligence sitting within the same bodily tree, like a bird sitting with another bird, as explained in the Upanishads, certainly the purport of the revealed information in the Vedas becomes clear to our vision. And there is no difficulty in realizing the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudeva. The intelligent man, therefore, after many births of such use of intelligence, surrenders himself at the lotus feet of Vasudeva, as confirmed by the Bhagavad Gita 7.19. Om Ajnana-timirandasya Jnana-yena-shamaya Chakshurunitanya Tasmai Shri-Gurave Namaha. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Krishna Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swamini Deva. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravan Pachani Nirvishesha Srimad Paschati Deshitani Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare. Translation: the personality of Godhead, Lord Shri Krishna, is in every living being along with the individual soul, and this fact is perceived and hypothesized in our acts of seeing and taking help from the intelligence. This verse and the purport is quite lengthy. Prabhupada elaborately explains in simplified terms that I'm saying right now is that how to realize ourself. And one way to do this in Sanskrit philosophy is through the principle of neti neti. Means not this, or definition by negation. And say, this hand is there, but I am not this hand. This leg is there, but I am not this leg, etc. And then eventually one comes to the point of realizing that there's something metaphysical or anti-physical, above matter or not matter, that is ever existing. And this necessitates that one come to the platform of goodness. In the modes of passion and or mixed ignorance, one cannot perceive their self properly. And therefore, this is the beginning platform is simply coming to the mode of goodness. And if any of you have seen Prabhupada, some of his last words when he's in his deathbed in Vrindavan, he's slowly speaking about this. If one associates, he says, with the mode of goodness, one eventually gets purified. This is him, Prabhupada, talking about this verse indirectly. And as such, when one is on that platform, he eventually is able to see this. And Krishna himself states this in the 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, text 2. Jnanam te hamsi savijnanam idam lakshyamya sheshataha yagyatvaneha bhuyum yach gyat avyam avashishyate. The translation, I shall now declare unto you in full this knowledge both phenomenal and numinous. This being known, nothing further shall remain for you to know. Krishna states this here, and just to unpack it a little bit, phenomenal, it's coming from the Greek word phenomenal, meaning that which appears. So that which appears to one person may not appear to another person. For example, us and an eagle. If we're high up in the sky, we cannot see almost anything in the plane down below. If anything, it's very ambiguous, vague. We can maybe see shapes and colors, forms, colors, etc. However, an eagle can see detail much further away. Therefore, that what appears is limited and cannot be accepted as absolute truth. One has to go beyond the limited sense perception of one's own abilities, physically speaking, both gross and subtle. Now, Prabhupada mentions in this purport often taking help of intelligence by way of the supersoul. And Krishna also himself mentioned this. He says, Dadami Buddhi Yogam Tam, that he personally gives intelligence. However, the prerequisite is Satatan Yuktano, to be always engaged in his service. And then Yena Mamapuyanti, to such people, then he gives the intelligence, and then they can come to him. In the next verse, this is chapter 10 of Bhagavad Gita, verse 11, he says exactly how he does it. He says, from within, I destroy with the shining lamp of knowledge, ignorance. This is a beautiful verse I always like to remind myself of. He says specifically to show them special mercy dwelling in their hearts, destroy with the shining lamp of knowledge the darkness born of ignorance. Prabhupada elsewhere mentions that the soul proper is sitting within the heart region, and this is actually supplying energy to this body. And he says specifically in the form of the corpuscles. This is the material thing, but the energy is transferred through the heart to the corpuscles, and then the corpuscles send energy throughout the blood, etc., through the veins, primarily. And this is what is animating our body. So with the help of intelligence, by form of Paramatma, super soul situated in everyone's heart, one can perceive this reality. If one takes to, for example, in quantum physics, this is the study of matter or energy and its behavior. There's no definite conclusion. And this is one of the highest forms of theories that one can come up with, is studying the symptoms. But what Prabhupada and the previous acharyas stated, that one studies oneself with a service attitude. He says the first step of knowledge is actually humility. So only one that is full with humility, not full with pride or false ego, can one then start to perceive little by little the soul that we are and the super soul residing within, and then ultimately come to Bhagavan realization that the person behind everything. And This, I want to focus on one portion of the purport now. Prabhupada calls this a form direction, by the way, that taking help of the super soul. Purport: one can perceive one's self-identification and feel positively that he exists. He may not feel it very abruptly, but by using a little intelligence, he can feel that he is not the body. Here, these two philosophies are defeated by this sense alone product. One is the Buddha philosophy, that we're a conglomeration of our physical existence, means our the earthly, earth, water, fire, air, ether, and then the subtle senses. Essentially, Buddhism teaches that we're a conglomeration of these things, as well as lust, anger, greed, delusion, etc., wrong understanding, that are constantly in flux. However, what Krishna teaches us through Srila Prabhupada is that that is there. However, that's a temporary reality, and that has no eternal existence. And the second one that it defeats is this nihilism, or the idea that at the point of death, thereafter, there's nothing else. Zero. Shunyavadi. However, Prabhupada said before, I've listened in lecture, I am something right now. How can I become nothing? This is a simple way to understand this. And then Prabhupada continues in the purport about analyzing our different extremities, head, hand, leg, etc., hair. He says, but that cannot be identified with his self. Therefore, just by using intelligence, he can distinguish and separate his self from other things that he sees. So the natural conclusion is that the living being, either man or beast, is a seer, and he sees besides himself all other things. Distinguishing right now, Prabhupada in this report, is that which sees and what is seen. These are two distinct things, however, one not in the mode of goodness, means following Krishna in regulated fashion. I cannot perceive these things being different. And this gets exacerbated or emphasized whenever anyone is under intoxication of any sort, whether that be gross or subtle. Gross means some substance abuse, right, recreationally or not. And subtly means any emotions that take one, thoughts, ideas, emotions that take one's beat away from Krishna, means away from understanding one's true identity. These things are actually stumbling blocks on the path of Krishna consciousness, and therefore it's recommended to do away with these things altogether. Now, a little bit moving forward. This point that Prabhupada makes, practical service attitude. It's required. If one is doing either no service or the minimum bare service, their advancement will be very slow. However, if one observes just the great personalities in any religious practice, to take our own Krishna consciousness, we see that they advance quite quickly and swiftly. And one way it's recognized is through their ideas that they get from the super soul and then implement. Here, I'll just highlight His Grace Vaisheshika Maharaj because he's just leading everyone so nicely and inspiring the whole world to distribute 100,008 Bhagavatams at least by September 26th. And in this way, these ideas are coming and then they're being implemented, and then he's empowering others to follow and realize these ideas, means put them practically into action. Now, a little bit on this Buddhist philosophy. because oftentimes we meet Buddha's followers, either rigidly or not. When I was in Colorado with Matsya Prabhu, I met this couple outside of a restaurant, and the wife said, I follow Buddhism, and the husband said, I follow shamanism. Shamanism is kind of this a spiritual path where one deals with different, they won't say it, but it's intoxicating substances, either in the form of vapor or some tea conjecture, something like that. And that is supposedly brings one a spiritual experience. However, Prabhupada says that to such people in a purport elsewhere in the Bhagavad Gita, he says that it's actually due to frustration. So one either rejects God or doesn't believe enough in God to the point where they then resort to something else to give them a spiritual experience. But that is just due to frustration. In Buddhism, it teaches that there's a middle way. There's a middle way means here the path between eternalism and nihilism, that there's an ultimate reality and there's nothing. Yet, at the same time, what is the ultimate reality then? If it's not fully absolute or an eternal reality, and there's not a temporary or complete annihilation of one's existence, then what is there? That's my question, if anyone can answer that. It sounds good, but it has its limits. I remember even myself trying to practice before getting the books by the devotees. A lot of asanas and breathing, waking up at midnight to practice the pranayama, observing isolation, all these different things. And then I came across Buddhism, and that sounds really nice, nirvana, cessation of all material anxieties. I can try this for a little bit. So I would adopt a few things from that practice. By Krishna's mercy through the devotees, I am getting substance now, everything that makes sense, and that one can stand behind very firmly. Therefore, I'm very grateful. And one more point, because we have a lot to extract from the purport. I want to open it up in a few minutes for discussion. Is that this concept of neti neti, or not this, not this, it's actually scientific. So if we say it's only Christian, it's only Catholic, it's only Buddhist, or it's only the Mohammedans, it's not. This is how it proves it's a science, that one take a principle, observe it, and analytically, right, use of intelligence, understand the nature of reality, its origin, etc. And then the functions naturally will come. And Krishna, through the five broad categories of the Bhagavad Gita, explains this, what Prabhupada is highlighting in the purport. Ishvara, controller. Jiva Atma, the individual soul, and then Prakriti, material nature. These are the three main things that are covered in this purport. And then we know Kala, time, and Karma, action, is the fourth and fifth categories of the Bhagavad Gita. In this way, one can come to the understanding through a scientific method of Krishna consciousness, or the science of self-realization, that I am categorically different from matter, regardless of religious affiliation, sectarian or dogmatic. Dogmatic means to impose an opinion or view as unquestionable truth. Oftentimes in Bhakti Srishmani, we'll find these types of people, that this is the only way. Yeah, there's a truth, but there are also other aspects of the truth that one can implement into their life and come to a conclusion. So about the nature of reality. In this way, because Krishna consciousness is a scientific method. Last time on the translation, the personality of Godhead, Lord Shri Krishna, is in every living being, along with the individual soul, and this fact is perceived and hypothesized in our acts of seeing and taking help from the intelligence. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. questions, commentary. Yes.
So you said about native principle. I didn't get it right. Are you saying Prabhupada is using native principle in the food? Is it
Yeah.
bona fide?
Yeah.
Who believes that?
Prabhupada spoke about this in a different part, that by neti or definition by negation, one can come to understand who they are. So they go to the different aspects of their gross and subtle existence, and then come to the conclusion that they're the eternal spirit soul within.
Now, my understanding of reading Prabhupada books was that neti ultimately leads to impersonalism. That I am not this body, I am not this mind. So ultimately, I am none of these things. That was my understanding. That I am nothing. I am impulse. It leads to impersonal understanding of the world.
That's possible, yeah, without properly understanding how to utilize this principle. Neti to a certain point, and then coming to the extent understanding of accepting that I am something, I am a soul. And this is found in the Brihad Naranyaka Upanishad. How to utilize this properly. Neti, understand that which we aren't, and then coming to a conclusion about that which we are.
Yes, absolutely.
Prabhupada himself has stated that
what we are, so.
yeah. That's
That Pandal or something. The prophet was in person was speaking. And Paul's eyes were closed. The prophet was not responding. And then at a certain point, Prabhupada, told the devotees to stop. And then Prabhupada said, he was speaking fine. The person was speaking fine. But then he started speaking against Krishna, and I couldn't tolerate it. So up to a certain point, what they're saying is fine. But if the body, this eternal world is not, that's the soul, but then the positive stuff, they don't get it. The form, the Lord. Have the personality of the Lord, have the personality of the individual soul. So that right up to a certain point, they align with proper understanding, but then that's the
Yeah. Thank you for that. We can delve also deeper into your comment, Prabhu. But what it reminds me of is His Grace Radhika Raman Prabhu's 3-course seminar on impersonalism, where he did 2 on Tattvamasi, right? And he said basically is that one can utilize this. He says, but in the proper context, it means that I am that, but I'm also different from that. I am that in the sense of what Prabhupada says of quality, but in quantity we are different. So to properly utilize neti is in a similar way. Isn't it?
Probably went to that school with the kids there, and he utilized this technique. He brought it to, and who's the intelligent boy? This boy's intelligent. He brought him up. Point to your head, point to your head, point to yourself, and then the kid. Something like that.
Yeah.
There seems to be some technique there. Understanding that I'm different.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Okay. Look satisfied. Prabhupada ki jai.
Yeah.